My name is Allison. I'm a park ranger with Blackstone River Valley, and I want to introduce our fantastic co-presenter tonight, Sarah Reynolds. I'll share with you her bio. Sarah was very generous to work with us from Valley Forge, where she is the lead park ranger at Valley Forge National Historical Park. In her 8 years as a park ranger with the National Park Service and her time with the Student Conservation Association, Sarah has worked in both historic and cultural museum collections and provided interpretation and education at 7 different sites. Originally from Colorado, which is where we started the series this year, Sarah has loved living in Pennsylvania, and her background in biological sciences is combined with her passion for 18th century history. She's very lucky, or she considers herself very lucky, to be at an American Revolution park close to the upcoming 250th anniversary of the signing of Declaration of Independence, and Valley Forge is also very lucky to have Sarah with them. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. We always start Parked at Home by talking a bit about what connects our two parks and a little bit about where we've been. You can imagine that Jill and I, we're tired. We've already gone over 5,000 miles over this series so far, just from March. No, we're not tired. All of these programs have been virtual, and we've been joined by rangers from the Rocky Mountains, a little bit closer from Saratoga, and of course, deep from a cave in Carlsbad, New Mexico. We still have one more program left. We're used to traveling in the Blackstone River Valley because our National Historical Park is made up of 6 separate historic sites. And we have the honor and privilege of traveling between those 6 sites you see on the map here today. And we also spend quite a bit of time at Old Slater Mill, number 1 on the map. These sites are stretched out across something known as a heritage corridor. And one of the people I'm going to talk about tonight as a human bridge between our parks was from Providence, Rhode Island. My colleague Mark Mello introduced a connection between our park and Saratoga by focusing on Worcester. So I decided to go to the south end of the Blackstone River Valley and talk a bit about Providence. And one of the ways that I want to bridge our stories between our two parks is to think about the state of Rhode Island, and specifically the state or the status of what's now our capital city of Providence around the time of the American Revolution. And if you travel to Providence, Rhode Island today, you're going to see a number of beautiful historic landmarks. And you also might quickly understand that this is not a place that is easily legible in terms of Revolutionary War history. You're not going to see the remnants of battles. You're not going to gaze out into open fields and see places where the fallen in the Revolution can be located. But you are going to see a very rich colonial history. And I mean that in 2 senses. When we talk about colonial history, and particularly the port of Providence in the 1700s, we're talking about a place that is contributing a lot to the British Empire, not just in terms of tax revenue, but the way that Providence served as a vital hub of commerce for the British in the 1700s. And what that meant to many people across the middle of that century was the slave trade. We absolutely cannot talk about Rhode Island's status on the eve of the Revolution without talking about slavery. Some of the foremost people who decried British tyranny, who wanted to be free of that system, held other people in bondage. It's what people all over the British Empire and all over the colonies knew about Rhode Island. One of the landmarks that is still a part of our skyline and part of one of our most densely populated areas in terms of colonial history is this building on the side, this large, big, beautiful brick building. And it encapsulates a lot of our themes about slavery and freedom on the edge of the Revolution. Not long before the Declaration of Independence, this building would be a witness to the rise of a free state of Rhode Island. That phrasing would surprise some of the people who built that building, because they were enslaved people. They were people who had been trafficked and transported across the Atlantic to work in Providence, and frankly, to make other people rich enough to build this kind of structure and to send their children to school there. In 1772, a number of people involved in the slave trade and other commerce attacked the HMS Gaspee. This was considered our first battle cry towards freedom in Rhode Island. 1774, Rhode Island decided that it would no longer import enslaved people, and yet throughout that century, Rhode Island at many times had the highest proportion of African people relative to other colonists, typically free people at that time. As all of this is happening, Rhode Island decides to declare its independence first. So free people deciding to break away. And I want to share with you something that they say about this decision. That instead of getting protection from the empire, they were being destroyed. And that they were forced to, quote, submit to debasing and detestable tyranny, whereby we are obliged by necessity, and it becomes our highest duty to use every means with which God and nature have furnished us in support of our rights and privileges to oppose that power which is exerted only for our destruction. Among the political leaders of the time was a man named Christopher Jenks, and Christopher Jenks lived a very short walk from where this building is located. Christopher Jenks was part of an elite in Rhode Island that made and profited off of slavery. This was the world that Jenks and others inhabited. And when we talk about the Revolution, it's important not to just look at that contradiction, but to also think about who was asked to fight in that revolution. Rhode Islanders who were free relied very heavily, at times almost exclusively in some places, on the work of enslaved African people. In this way, it's not terribly surprising that these same elites would rely on enslaved people to fight their war for independence. Christopher Jenks enlisted a man that he owned, actually two men, in 1777. He had Prince Jenks enlisted in the fight for the American Revolution, and Prince would go on a really extraordinary journey, leaving the Providence you see on the map here and leaving a cluster of colonial houses not far from that University Hall to travel across some of the most important battlefields of the American Revolution. If we look up Prince Jenks in a conventional way, we can see this kind of listing. We can get dates for his service starting in 1777, and we can learn the basics of when he served, where he served. The fact that he was 20 upon the start of the war when he is enlisted, that he is 5'6", born in Guinea, and forced to work in Providence for the Jenks family. Prince Jenks enlists before there's a promise for freedom. I want to pause on that for a second. There were enslaved African people who joined the military during the Revolution, thinking that this fight for freedom might also become a way to achieve their own freedom. When Prince is forced to join, he has no promise of that. He has no expectation that the land and the coat and the money promised for his enlistment will ever even reach him. The idea is that that will go to his master, the man on Benefit Street. Prince Jenks serves for 6 years, and you can imagine him at one point in a uniform similar to this, but not right away. Mr. Jenks was a drummer, and he could be found at Red Bank, Valley Forge, the Croton River, Fort Oswego, and a number of other important moments in the Revolution. All along, for more than 6 years, Prince Jenks struggled. He buried people he loved along the battlefield, but he continued to fight, and he received several commendations for that fight. And all along those 6.5 years, he is drumming. He is providing a rhythm for people who are fighting this war together. It must have been an absolutely extraordinary experience to fight for the freedom of colonies where people were legally allowed to enslave you. The story of Prince Jenks and other men, part of the regiment that he joins, eventually called the First Rhode Island, has been commemorated in different parts of Rhode Island. You can go to places such as the Varnum Armory and see people recreating the different military apparel and the different aspects of the First Rhode Island, which is what Prince Jenks fought in and what Sarah will give us a lot more information about in terms of his time in Valley Forge. I want to underscore something that will also make the Valley Forge story more impactful. Valley Forge is fairly early in Prince Jenks' military experience, and one of the things that folks remark upon when they meet soldiers at Valley Forge is that many of them are not well dressed. They don't look like what we see here. New military uniforms are afforded to the men of the First Rhode Island to create a better appearance, to have stronger cohesion among the soldiers, and to also provide more dignity to these people who are fighting for the freedom of others. And here is another representation of the First Rhode Island, the famous Battle of Rhode Island, which does happen much closer to home for Prince. At the end of his service, Prince Jenks has to write a letter in a local newspaper. He is never really fully compensated for his service, and he suffers a great disability at the end of his service. And he writes a plea in a Providence paper, and he says, "I assisted General Washington in achieving the liberties of America." That is no exaggeration based on his more than 6 years of service. I was thinking about Prince Jenks this week and the way that the revolution can be all around us if we choose to see it. If we choose to look at buildings either constructed by enslaved people or supported by the labor of enslaved people, and the fight for the revolution itself. This coin shows a man drumming, and it depicts what I typically have thought of as a Revolutionary War soldier, a person fighting for freedom, for the colonies to break away, but a person who himself has always had his own freedom. And I thought about what's as common as a US penny, and the penny tells us e pluribus unum, out of many, one. When Prince Jenks joins the military, he is not thought of course, as a future citizen. He is not a free person. The challenge at Valley Forge was how to make people such as Prince and this disparate collection of soldiers from all these different colonies, many different people, into one army. That was a challenge made much harder by the conditions and the stories that people brought with them to battle. When you have a group of men marching, you don't hear the singular beat of the drummer from a man such as Prince. You hear the orchestra of people's bodies moving through space and time. So when you think about something as simple as a coin or the architecture and the building of a city such as Providence, we should think of a man such as Prince and what he did to achieve the liberties of America. We invited Sarah to talk with us tonight because we wanted to know much more, not just about Prince, but about the other men of the First Rhode Island and all of the people who fought at Valley Forge, who encamped at Valley Forge, and the way that they became one singular army to unite to form one singular country. So I'm going to switch things over to Sarah so that she can start to share with us. Let me get out of here. Oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. So Sarah, whenever you're ready to put your PowerPoint on.
So, is that visible to everybody? We can see, hopefully, George Washington on a horse. Okay, great.
Yes, we did not plan to have the same first slide.
No, we didn't, but it's hard not to. This is a very classic Valley Forge image, and we'll talk a little bit about it as well.
This looks great.
Thank you so much, Allison. Hi, everybody. Thrilled to be part of the Parked at Home series this year. Speaking to you from my office at Valley Forge. I have a backdrop behind me of the aides de camp office at Washington's headquarters. So a little bit more 18th century than my current modern office. So as Allison said, I'm going to discuss the history of Valley Forge and especially dive into some of the histories of quite a few people here, including those Black Patriots. Many people have likely heard of Valley Forge, and you should at least know that it's one of the many turning points in the American Revolution. To be fair, there are quite a few. Interestingly, Valley Forge seems to be more romanticized and mythologized than almost any other moment in the American Revolution. So we're going to go into a lot of the facts of the site. So to get us started, we do need a quick, brief overview of the American Revolution so far, kind of leading up to Valley Forge. It's going to give us a lot of context to the Continental Army's decisions and explain why we are in such a tough spot in the winter of 1777 and 1778. And then we will get into the details of Valley Forge specifically. So going all the way back to the French and Indian War, remember that was an incredibly expensive war for Great Britain. Increased taxes on the colonists are put in place to support Great Britain's efforts in the colonies. From Great Britain's point of view, they had protected the colonists from the French and would continue to protect the colonists from outside forces, and therefore needed a little extra money to kind of help along with that. The colonists, on the other hand, are upset that these taxes are coming without representation in Parliament. So to quiet those rebellious New Englanders, Great Britain moves troops to Boston in 1768. It has the opposite effect, surprise, surprise, and actually stirs up more aggravation. So, of course, then we have that Declaration of Independence in July of 1776. The Continental Congress in Philadelphia voted to break and declare our independence from Great Britain. Just because we declared it doesn't mean it happened, and the British certainly don't agree to it. Then a little bit later, about a month later, there are a series of American defeats around New York City. And that means the British are going to hold New York City for the rest of the American Revolution. So all the way through 1783. So really quite a lot more effort to kind of hold that one area. Then, of course, there's the classic crossing of the Delaware and the American victories at Trenton and Princeton. So the Americans are feeling pretty good. We're doing all right. And then I'm sorry to say that we arrive to the Philadelphia campaign, the fall of 1777. Now, George Washington's portion of the army is not faring well. They lose the Battle of Brandywine. There is a massacre at Paoli. We lose the Battle of Germantown. So we really are not doing well. And these battles are centered kind of right on the outskirts of Philadelphia, which at the time was our capital city. And we are trying so hard to not let the British capture that city, right? We want to hold our own capital. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that the British do capture Philadelphia on September 26, 1777. Continental Congress has to flee west to York, Pennsylvania. And then there we are. We've kind of run into the end of that Philadelphia campaign. So a couple of logistical points to make before we dive into Valley Forge. To give you some perspective of what the colonies looked like at that time, I've got some population sizes up. Now, keep in mind, this is a rough estimate. They aren't doing census until 1790s. So these are rough estimates, but you can see Philadelphia was the largest city in the colony with about 43,000. New York was about 25,000, and then it kind of goes through those top five, including Boston, Charleston, and Newport. There you go, Rhode Island, you're on the list. 2020 populations, for a little perspective there, Philadelphia now has about 1.5 million people that live in the city, and New York City, of course, has exploded. Now, to put this in perspective, most modern football stadiums hold about 60,000 people. So you could fit the entire colonial population of Philadelphia in the Philadelphia Eagles stadium, let's say. So really not a whole lot of people. So kind of put some perspectives in mind for you when we talk about the Valley Forge population in just a minute. One of the other things that we have to talk about is the difference between, what's a battle site, what's a battlefield, right, versus an encampment. So many American Revolution sites across the country are usually a battlefield, a cemetery, a place where George Washington slept. There are very few examples of an encampment site. So maybe you've heard the myth that there were agreements between armies to pause for the winter and to meet again in the spring because that's the gentlemanly thing to do. Not true. Think about the logistics of moving thousands and thousands of people through winter weather. Think of trying to amass supplies while you were on the move. Armies tended to settle and use that time to resupply and reorganize themselves. Now, that's not to say there aren't engagements between the enemy armies. There certainly are. But that encampment is that moment to kind of take a breath and reset yourself. And so I've listed just a few of those encampments that we see during the American Revolution. Two of them pictured here are actually national park sites. So Longfellow House, Washington's headquarters, is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And then Morristown, New Jersey is pictured there on the right. The American Army actually encamps there twice. So two of kind of those main houses, right, where George Washington was staying. But gives you an idea, right? There's a few of those sites and they're park service. So, and then Valley Forge is kind of smack dab in the middle. And altogether, there were 8 winter encampments. So there are more years to the American Revolution than some folks remember. Okay, so here's an image of that encampment, right? Basically, a small city appears overnight in that farmland outside of Philadelphia. Now, estimates are going to vary, but somewhere between 12 to 15,000 soldiers are going to arrive to encamp in that winter. So going back to those populations we talked about, right? Philadelphia, the biggest city in the country, had 43,000 people. Valley Forge having that 12 to 15,000 people all of a sudden makes this the 4th largest city in the country overnight. So really, really big change to the landscape. Now, Valley Forge in particular, the Army marches in December 19th, 1777. And I've always loved this painting by William Trego, right? Allison and I both used it. It really does kind of get across what it's like for these soldiers arriving to Valley Forge. You have, they look tired, they look ill-supplied, they look cold, and Washington is right there with them. And I think, just kind of one glimpse, this is pretty accurate. This is what it looks like. So when they get to the area, they will use tents and brush huts. They will construct brush huts for the first few nights. And that's commonly what they would do on campaign as well. Something that it's quick and easy to set up. You can do it just about anywhere and pack up and ready to go whenever you need to. I should make one side note here. A lot of the pictures you're going to see during my presentation, I'm sorry to tell you, they did not have cameras in the 18th century. What we have here are behind the scenes footage and stills from our park film. So really, really lucky to have all of these resources. Gives you an idea of what it looked like. So no original pictures, I'm sorry. So right, they're setting up this encampment, the tents, the brush huts, things like that. Is this going to work long-term for several months? No. And that's where we're going to get huts. So George Washington sends out general orders. He says, I would like huts to be constructed, and I want them this many feet by this many feet, and I want the door like this, and I want the chimney like this. Okay, great. So if you've ever worked on a group project with several other people, and let's say half of them are sick, and let's say half of them have zero experience building anything, and let's give you one dull axe to build your whole hut, how well is this process going to go? Not well. That's one of the problems that the soldiers are going to run into. So they're going to need to build something more stable. They will construct these huts. And once you have them, they're great, right? When you're inside, you're going to be warm. You get that fire going, the door's shut. You're actually going to stay pretty warm inside a hut. But they are going to be cramped. They are going to be dirty. They are going to be smelly. So not ideal. Most huts are going to house about 12 soldiers. Officers could have fewer. So going back to that picture of the encampment again, you kind of see how that little city starts to spring up. All of a sudden you have all of these huts overnight. It does take a few days. So you're going to have these huts grown kind of up. And we think there were probably about 1,500 to 2,000 of these huts in the encampment. So really quite sizable. So they're tearing up all of these trees. They are having thousands of people walk back and forth on this space. So all of that in combination with your average Pennsylvania winter means mud. And that's going to be the big problem at Valley Forge. It's not buried under feet and feet of snow. We're going to get a lot of rain, and it will be just above freezing. And actually, thanks to a local farmer, we know the weather for every single day of the encampment. So it gives us a good idea. So if it's muddy, just like it's pictured there on the left, you are going to have a hard time getting your wagons into camp. And wagons bring food. So even if you're getting the wagons, if they're delayed, that food is likely going to spoil. So here's what the soldiers should be getting, right? They should be getting up to about 3,000 calories a day. You're getting some bread, about 1.5 pounds of bread. You are getting about 1 pound of meat. You're getting some spruce or malt beer every once in a while. And then once a week, kind of some of those extras like butter, vinegar, right? So what do they actually get? About 500 calories a day. We're looking at something called fire cake. Fire cake is that water and flour mixed together, kind of made into a patty shape, cooked. So think of like the worst pancake you've ever had, but worse. That is fire cake. So it keeps you alive, but it is certainly not ideal. And there's a surgeon, Albert's Waldo, who writes a really excellent diary for the first few months of the encampment. And he's always very good with words. And one of the things he puts down is this conversation he has with a soldier. What have you got for breakfast, lads? Fire cake and water, sir. And Albert's Waldo comments, the Lord send that our commissary of purchases may live on fire cake and water till their glutted guts are turned to pasteboard, which is such an image. They're eating this fire cake. They are staying alive, but it is certainly not a glamorous situation. And it's not just food. It's not getting through the supply lines, right? It's clothing. We have a few pictures here of kind of some tattered looking soldiers. Pants are falling apart, cuffs are falling off, maybe your stockings have a lot of holes in them. At the worst point in early March, we are looking at about 3,000 men who are unfit for duty, just due to a lack of clothing. So altogether, these soldiers are cold and they're wet and they're hungry and they're in these close quarters of huts, right? All of this means that they are much more susceptible to disease. And that is the problem at Valley Forge. About 2,000 people die from disease. They're not starving to death. They're not freezing to death. They're sick. And so they're getting things like dysentery, typhoid, influenza, right? The flu. Smallpox, not so much. They are inoculated against smallpox. That involves a deliberate exposure to smallpox, usually through like a little incision on the arm. That gives you a kind of a mild case of smallpox, but not one that usually will do any long-term damage other than a little physical pockmark. But then you have immunity. If you survive, you have immunity against smallpox. Washington will continue to use the inoculation program at Valley Forge. It does require soldiers to be quarantined, though, so it does pull them from the ranks for a little bit, but it is worth the time and effort to not have your whole army taken out by smallpox naturally. So other than surviving, which is the majority of a soldier's life, what else is going on at Valley Forge? Well, the Army is trying to run the entire war effort from the encampment. And so generals are making decisions about troop movements. You are begging Congress for money and supplies. they're trying to reorganize the entire army. How the supply chain works is all over the place. States are supplying their own guys individually, which makes for very different balance in resources. So having the army kind of set up as one singular system, providing everybody the same way, that's what they're working toward. George Washington writes Henry Lawrence, who is the president of the Continental Congress at the time, and talks about how difficult it is. And this quote here on the left, this one line, the army must inevitably be reduced to one or other of these three things: starve, dissolve, or disperse. He is trying to express how desperate the American army is. They really need support from Congress. They need money, they need supplies, they need help. And so some of the big players other than Washington, again, a film still we have pictured in the bottom right here. From left to right, you've got the Marquis de Lafayette, you have George Washington, you have Nathaniel Greene, Alexander Hamilton, and then Henry Knox. So a lot of those major or brigadier generals who are running the encampment. And where all of these meetings take place? At Washington's headquarters, which is a structure you can actually still visit today. And pictured behind me, right, that aides de camp office, that's where people like Alexander Hamilton and John Lawrence are doing a lot of the paperwork, the letter writing, a lot of that behind the scenes support for Washington and the army. Altogether, Washington will live in this house with about 25 other people. So 6 to 8 aides de camp doing that letter writing and paperwork, about 10 to 15 servants and enslaved staff. Martha Washington will come visit for a few months. So it's going to be a crowded and busy space. So why did they pick Valley Forge for this encampment location? There were a lot of options. Here, we've got an image from our Junior Ranger book. So Americans wanted to be close enough to keep an eye on the British, but not so close they're going to get a surprise attack. So they've picked this area about a day's march away. It allows the Americans to protect the weapons and the resources up in Reading, Pennsylvania, the food out west in Lancaster, and then the Continental Congress all the way out west in York. So by being in that kind of central location, they're able to kind of sweep out and protect any foraging parties that the British might be sending out. And to give you a little perspective, that red dot in the bottom right-hand corner of Pennsylvania, swing that up, that's Valley Forge. By car, we're about 40 minutes from the city, center city today, where Independence Hall is. Not the day's march, it's certainly better these days. And then here's the encampment, right? So we protect about 3,500 acres as the National Park Service today. That's that green space. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here, and you can see kind of what the encampment looks like today. So that blue line is the 10-mile driving route. And that kind of follows a lot of the big basic physical defenses of the encampment. Tour stop number 2 on the right-hand side, the Muhlenberg Brigade. That is along what we call the outer line drive, kind of a high ground point in the encampment. So you're going to have a lot of huts lined along that way, right? You like that high ground. On the left-hand side, you can see Mount Joy, and then to the left of that a little bit, the Valley Creek, that little windy blue line, and then it's cut off, but Mount Misery is on the left side of that. So there's your kind of physical barriers on that side. And then that light blue line at the top is the Schuylkill River. So altogether, this is a triangle of defense. So that's where you're kind of lining up a lot of your huts, a lot of your defensive points. It's a very solid place for an encampment. And, the French chief engineer for the Continental Army is Duportail, and here's his kind of layout of what that would have looked like, a little bit better layout of the encampment. Okay, so we have a lot of people to get through, so we're going to go through the quick basics of a lot of the guys who helped out at Valley Forge. You've likely, maybe, hopefully, heard of the Prussian officer Baron von Steuben. Now, he is coming over as a volunteer, hoping to eventually get on the American Army payroll. What he sees when he arrives at Valley Forge is a lot of soldiers doing good work, but they're not doing it in the same way. And to be a good army, you have to be unified. So he's going to take these drills that he writes, right, for muskets, for marching, even how to have a healthy encampment set up, and he's going to combine it all into what he will eventually call the Blue Book, right, this manual for training the American Army. So the soldiers are going to get better, right? They're all going to be trained in one way, and by the end of the encampment, they are fighting as one unified force. That's a big deal. That's why we call ourselves the birthplace of the American Army. So there you go. He gets the Blue Book later, right? And so parts of that are actually still used to train the American Army today, which is fascinating, I think. All right, so who else was here, right? You know people like George Washington, great. Who else was here? When the Army first arrives to Valley Forge, it's about 18 different farms. So there are people whose entire lives are here. The Army is coming here, cutting down all of these trees, basically camping in their backyard for what eventually becomes 6 months. So there were farmers. There was an 18th century industrial village here, right? The iron industry. There were mills, sawmills, grist mills. So the Army sees that kind of when they get here. Soldiers, of course, yes, there are soldiers. We'll go into a few. Specifically, we're going to tie back really quickly to Saratoga National Historical Park when they did their Parked at Home series just a couple weeks ago. Ranger Eric talked about Colonel Timothy Bigelow. Yes, he was here at Valley Forge as well. That little orange circle on our map shows where his Massachusetts regiment was located in the encampment. That bottom left corner of the screen that has a lot of that information about commanders and which regiments, we are pulling this information off what we call the muster roll. This gives you an idea of where a soldier was, who were their commanders. If there's any special notes like was in the hospital or on campaign, something like that, that will be marked on the muster roll. So it's great when we have resources like that to pull from. But not everybody's on the muster roll. So people like African Americans, Black Americans, American Indians, women, some of them may be on the muster roll, but it might not give you that entire story the way we see from people like George Washington. So a lot of these contributions from these groups are not told fully. A lot of them are found piecemeal in purchase records, in somebody's diary, in a baptismal record. And so putting them all together gives these people narratives. It gives them humanity, and it makes it very easy for us to find connections to people in the 18th century. So some of the big groups, right? Camp followers, they were here at Valley Forge too. These are individuals who have no other option other than to follow the Army. This is the way that they are getting food, shelter, their breadwinner. If it was the father, the husband, the son, they have gone to war. And so these women and children are going to have to follow kind of as that family unit. Washington calls them a clog upon every movement. Okay, great. That's really flattering and kind. But he realizes he can't send these soldiers, these camp followers home because they're soldiers. Their families will go home with them. And Washington cannot afford to lose them. So he says, fine, you can stay, but you have to make yourselves useful. So a lot of women will become laundresses. They will also do nursing. That's going to be a really important, dangerous job in the encampment, becoming a nurse and helping out at these field hospitals. Kids are even supposed to help too, right? Gathering food, gathering wood, gathering water. So everybody has to make the encampment work. So a lot of these people have done an enormous amount of work that never shows up on a muster roll. There are American Indian nations that are allied with the Americans. 4 major groups, the Oneida, the Tuscarora, the Mohican, and the Stockbridge Munsee. They will ally themselves with the Americans over the British for a variety of reasons. But specifically, the Oneida will be great friends to the Americans who are here at Valley Forge. In the spring of 1778, they arrive, about 50 of their warriors arrive to assist with some scouting parties. And they actually end up saving the Marquis de Lafayette and about 2,000 of the American soldiers during a battle called the Battle of Barren Hill. So they're going to step up and create a diversion, which will actually save the American Army. One of their women, Polly Cooper, according to oral tradition, brings corn to share with the Continental Army, and also teaches, again, according to oral tradition, how to forage for some particular berries and roots. So kind of sharing that knowledge with the American soldiers as well. Okay, so there are a lot of Black patriots during the American Revolution. And Allison talked about the Rhode Island regiments, right? Okay, there's our connection. So I love the image that she showed, right? There are a lot of images of their uniforms, and you're right, they are commented on a lot. So we've got an image down at the bottom there, a watercolor. It's very famous. A lot of sites will pull this one out, and it just shows how beautiful those white uniforms are, the hats that have the anchor, and then those blue and white feathers off the top, or sometimes tassels, really make for quite a striking uniform. And I cannot imagine how difficult it would have been to keep a white uniform clean. Really, really difficult. So as Allison said, right, there is this specific Rhode Island regiment. Brigadier General James Varnum, while they were here at Valley Forge, recognizes that there is a pretty easy solution to getting more enlistments, right? They need more soldiers. Great. His home state of Rhode Island, he wants to propose a solution to their state legislature, which ends up being enacted. And it allowed the Rhode Island government to purchase the freedom of any man who was able to bear arms for the Continental Army. So this is huge, right? We are offering this exchange of freedom if you serve your country. Okay, so there were already Native and Black Americans who were serving in the 1st and 2nd Rhode Island regiments at Valley Forge. There's a little bit of a reorganization that happens during that encampment, and they end up kind of becoming one regiment that's called the Black Regiment, right? So very specifically, that one regiment. To Allison's point again about the uniforms, an aide-de-camp to the French General Rochambeau will comment that the regiment is the most neatly dressed, the best under arms, and the most precise in its maneuvers. So really pointed out high praise for this group of people. An estimated 5,000 African-American soldiers are going to fight in the American Revolution. Although most of the Black soldiers from New England are going to fight in integrated regiments, the 1st Rhode Island was the exception, and it was made up of about 197 Black men. So it's really just this stunning example of Black patriots kind of all together in one space. Now, the Rhode Island Regiment, not the only Black patriots. We have other famous people like William Lee. He was George Washington's personal enslaved manservant. William Lee travels everywhere with Washington. By all accounts, he was actually a really talented horseman. He's able to keep up with George Washington on a horse. He is going to be trusted with a lot of private messages. He will be with Washington at a lot of the private meetings, etc. So William Lee is going to be someone that is an excellent example of someone who is forced into service, but providing a service for that country. So here is William Lee portrayed in John Trumbull's painting, George Washington and William Lee. And we actually have a bust of him here at Valley Forge as well. We also have, going back to Washington's headquarters household, there's a free Black woman who does the laundry. Her name is Margaret Thomas. She actually ends up marrying William Lee. Margaret Thomas is there. We find out a lot of her story through letters, through purchase agreements. So again, this moment of finding little bits and pieces in the history that end up creating an entire narrative. Well, as good a narrative as we can have without her own words. Hannah Till, or Hannah Longpoint Till Archer, also someone that is occasionally mentioned. We talk about her here a lot at Valley Forge. She is an enslaved woman. She was sold many times in her early life, ends up in New York City when the British are about to take over. So there were a lot of enslavers who ended up leasing out their enslaved staff to other people so that they could kind of earn their wages back and therefore be set free, but the enslaver would have earned their original purchase price back. This happens to Hannah and her husband Isaac. They are both leased to George Washington just before the Valley Forge encampment. They are cooks, so they will be living and working in the Washington's headquarters building as well. Interestingly, Hannah has a baby while she's here at Valley Forge, something that nobody in that headquarters buildings mentions, something that we don't know until a baptismal record is found from a church in Philadelphia that mentions baby Isaac, who was born at Valley Forge. So there you go. This one little throwaway line. Now we know there was also a baby in Washington's headquarters. Then we have examples like Martin Black, somebody who joined of his own volition in the North Carolina Regiment, got reassigned to a different brigade, right? They're trying to reorganize, rebalance brigades. We know he fought at the Battle of Monmouth. We know that he actually is captured in South Carolina, but escapes and then returns to join his regiment. We know about people like William Condo, who was born enslaved. His enslaver promised to free William Condo in 1787, but actually ends up taking him to war with him as a waiter, as they're called, kind of a personal servant. He is still enslaved. We have military musters that show Condo was sick. So, okay, great. That gives us a little detail. We know from somebody else's oral history that during the Battle of Monmouth, Condo's enslaver was injured, and Condo actually takes his enslaver off the field and saves him. And when Condo's enslaver retires from the army, he asks Washington to be able to take William Condo with him too. So then he kind of disappears, right? We know he re-enlists, but then after that, he's not on a census record. We don't know if he remains enslaved. We don't know if he got his freedom. The trail kind of ends. So there are people like William Condo. There are people like Nero Hawley, who was part of the 2nd Connecticut. We have someone who's enlisted in the place of his enslaver. That happened a lot too. Somebody doesn't want to go to war. They send their enslaved person instead, and they're serving out their time on the Continental Army as well. He does eventually obtain his freedom in exchange for his military service. So that did end up working out. And we know about him through a veteran's pension as well, right? These little trails, these little pieces of paperwork. There's Agrippa Hall. He ends up in a few American Indian villages, ends up becoming chief. And we have muster roll records that indicate that he was encamped at Valley Forge. Then he ends up working for Thaddeus Kosciuszko and becomes a very close friend to Kosciuszko, so close, in fact, that he will invite him back to Poland after the war is over. But Agrippa Hall will stay in the United States. He actually becomes the largest Black landowner in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. You have someone like Colonel Lewis, who ends up, oh, I'm so sorry, I just said the wrong thing for Agrippa Hall and Colonel Lewis. So Colonel Lewis is the one who ends up becoming a chief of the American Indian tribe. And he will do a lot of work with the Oneida delegation at Valley Forge, and eventually some work with the Oneida and the Continental Congress as well. You have Salem Poor, who was born enslaved. He purchases freedom and then of his own volition enlists in the Massachusetts militia. He will distinguish himself. An officer will actually write a testimonial on his behalf, how well he exerted himself at the Battle of Bunker Hill. You have people like Richard Rhodes, born in Africa, then enslaved. Muster roll is going to show him as injured. So great, we have a little detail there. And but still shows that he continues his military service, ends up at Yorktown too. Stacy Williams, the only known Black veteran who joined a Pennsylvania Continental unit and left behind a pension narrative. So again, a pension is going to tell us a lot about him. And Williams will encamp at Valley Forge and end up moving down in the southern part of the Southern campaign as well. Right? And so there's all these histories, and I know I'm blazing through these very quickly because these are each stories within their own right. They do a whole PowerPoint on just these individuals. The final one I have, Prince Simbo. He has this powder horn, this carved powder horn, which is shown in the top right corner. It is inscribed Prince Simbo, his horn made at Glastonbury, November 17th. And the decorative motifs on the horn include an all-seeing eye and a bird carrying a banner with the word liberty. That's on the other side. So this little piece of history that's actually left behind, this is actually part of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. So little piece left behind there. Okay, so to wrap up Valley Forge, right? What happens? We get the alliance with France, right? We officially get word of this on May 5th, 1778. This is a huge deal. They are our first international ally. The French have secretly been supplying the Americans for years with muskets, with clothing, with money. But their declaration of an alliance was a big deal. It will actually inspire other countries to step up and ally themselves against the British as well. So, big deal. Now the British have to make a decision. They can't hold Philadelphia and New York City. They have to focus on the fact that France might try and take some of their other territories across the world. So the British are going to abandon Philadelphia on June 18th, 1778, and start to work their way back up towards New York. The Americans follow a day later on June 19th, 1778. So to be clear, the war goes on for another 5 years, right? But what the Americans learn at Valley Forge with von Steuben's training, this will help them outlast the British. This will help keep them on point. Now, a lot of the research that I shared today comes from a variety of sources. I have excellent colleagues at the National Park Service, people who came before me, people who are my coworkers today, who have done an enormous amount of research. And the National Park Service prides itself on diligent research and then sharing that research with the public. And that's why we do what we do. We protect these places, these resources, these histories, to be able to share them with you, the public. And we ask you to help us take care of these places as well. Then you get things like, in addition to kind of your regular National Park Service research, this pictured here on the right, a historic resource study by Justin Clement, who is a colleague of ours at a neighboring historic site, the Patriots of African descent at the Valley Forge encampment of 1777 to 1778. This is like the nitty gritty. Justin went down a lot of rabbit holes, a lot of pieces of paper, a lot of trails to try and put together a more comprehensive narrative for a lot of the people that I just barely touched on. There is a lot more history to share with a lot of these groups. And then that bottom left, right, I mentioned a lot of the stills came from our park film, that Determined to Persevere. So altogether, why is Valley Forge important? Why do we still talk about it when there are 8 years of the American Revolution? What's the point? There are a few examples of encampments. So being able to show what an average soldier's life was like the majority of the time, that is important. After Baron von Steuben's training, we are showing what the birthplace of the American Army looks like, right? It happened here. They become that cohesive fighting unit. The alliances that we make, the Oneida, the Tuscarora, the French, these individuals who, whether they were forced into service, they stepped up of their own volition, people whose contributions are never recorded. It took everybody to make this encampment work. It took everybody. So when people wanted to set aside Valley Forge to protect this history, it goes all the way back to 1893. This was Pennsylvania's first state park in 1893. It actually becomes a national park site on July 4th, 1976. So we're coming up on our 50th anniversary. Interestingly, here's a good trivia fact for you. We are the only national park site created on a July 4th at all. We just happen to get the bicentennial too. So pictured there is President Ford, who came to the park to sign over to the National Park Service that day. And so today it's easy, right? You have a lot of statues of people. How do you remember this? You have statues, you have monuments, you have things set aside. Specifically here at Valley Forge, there's von Steuben, there's George Washington, there's General Anthony Wayne, there's an arch marking the location where the Army first arrived at Valley Forge. We also have the Patriots of African Descent Monument. Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated is the largest sorority in the world for African American women, and they proposed a monument to these Black Patriots in 1990. So on June 19th, 1993, this is unveiled, and it was the first monument on federal grounds to recognize patriots, Black patriots and their contributions. So we're very, very proud to have this here in our park. So hopefully I've sold the park to you. Hopefully that you're interested. You want to come see us. If you've seen us before, you want to come back. So a lot of different ways to visit, right? Always check our website, right? We love when you check the National Park Service website. It tells you about all our special events going on. Sometimes we have things like living history demonstrations. So, you know, we were dressed up in the 18th century stuff. Sometimes we're firing muskets. Sometimes there are cannon firings. But at the very least, you can visit, you know, reproduction soldier huts, see what it was like for a soldier to live here at Valley Forge. You can visit the original Washington's headquarters. You know, we have our park film, which is online as well. You can take a trolley, you can do bike rentals, you know, it's this beautiful park where you get this melding of historic visitors, locals who use it as their kind of local park for recreation. There's natural resources. So we do have a little bit of everything. So with all of that being said, thank you again. I'm so happy to be able to share Valley Forge history with you, to make this connection with Blackstone River Valley. Just really cool work going on in the National Park Service. I'm glad we can connect about it.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking us virtually to Valley Forge. We really appreciate you. You know, part of what we were thinking of with this presentation is we have all these different human connections, but I really think part of what you see whenever we travel virtually for Parked at Home, that same e pluribus unum, right, out of many, one. The National Park Service is a huge mosaic, and we cannot tell the story of the American Revolution at one place. We're all going to be doing our part, I think, for the next 2 years to try to tell that story. So we want to thank Sherilyn, who now has to thank herself through ASL. Maybe she's laughing, but thank Sherilyn for doing excellent work as always as our American Sign Language interpreter. And I want to thank you, Sarah, for joining us, for giving us your time. If people want to reach out to you to ask any follow-up questions, can they do that? Can we drop your email in the chat?
Yes, absolutely. Happy to help.
Wonderful. And I want to thank you all so much for spending even just an hour learning about your national parks, learning about the different patriots who made this country what it is today, and for connecting with us. We appreciate every single one of you for spending your time. We are going to be doing our first international national park next week, so please be sure to tune in. Don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions. And again, thank you, Sarah, and we are going to log off. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thanks for everybody coming.
Of course, thank you all.